The following podcast is part of the MindBodySpirit.fm podcast network. Above the clouds of the Blue Ridge Mountains, there's a place where the noise fades and your breath comes easier. The Art of Living Retreat Center offers signature meditation, breathwork, and yoga retreats designed to calm the mind and renew the spirit. Choose a guided program, a self-paced R&R stay, or join inspiring guest teachers from around the world. Visit artoflivingretreatcenter.org and use code PODCAST for 20% off. Retreat to the mountain. Return to yourself.
Finding a new job is stressful, but with Indeed, it doesn't have to be. Just fill out your Indeed profile with your skills, experience, and desired salary. The more you fill out, the better your matches will be. And hearing from hiring managers will be 2 times more likely. Relax. That's your Indeed profile sending opportunities your way. Indeed, the world can work better.
Wholeness means to me being in a state of joy.
Wholeness means feeling complete, owning my authentic gifts.
Wholeness is really connected. Everything is connected to everything.
Wholeness is where we have access to all parts of ourselves.
As we were planning the episodes for the book Braving the Wilderness by Brené Brown, this story showed up on my feed about Valerie and the decision she had to make to resign from her membership of her faith because she was being threatened of excommunication and chose to make that decision on her own terms. As I thought about and was reading the book, this journey of hers was the epitome of this braving the wilderness and learning to belong to yourself. So I reached out to see if we could have a conversation because I think this is something that touches a lot of us. We have a belief system, whether that's a formal religion or not, that we hold to. Some of us, this happens politically, where things shift in someone's thinking and it causes a disruption in the relationship. And that was something that Valerie has been trying to work with couples and people, individuals, to keep their relationships intact, centering around her relationship with her faith. I hope you enjoy this conversation. I think it's relatable on all levels. We talk about some things that get in the way of a relationship and that get in the way of the real reason that maybe we're here walking the earth are to develop. Whether it's mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually, we are here to grow and learn, and that doesn't look the same for everyone. I really hope you can identify with some things in her story and bring them into yours.
So I was kind of I struggled a little bit earlier on in my young adulthood, mostly because it was hard for me to feel like I had sort of found myself or found my place. And being a very traditionally believing member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, to me, it felt like I didn't really have a choice, so I kind of proceeded in the parenting path, the stay-at-home mom path. And it just didn't ever really fit me very well. Not that I didn't want to be a mother, and not that I didn't and don't love my children, but right. I just always felt there was something else that I was made for. And so as my life unfolded, I was called to be the Relief Society president in my ward here in the Midwest as a very young woman in a quite competent ward. It really actually made no sense whatsoever. And I was not in one of those places where they had no one to choose from. And so it was shocking to not only me, but honestly, everyone else as well. It was just barely like 31 or 32 or something like that. And that led me down the path of ministry. I enjoyed working with people. And I found myself really trying to delegate out as much as I possibly could so I could just talk to women who were struggling and who needed comfort and presence. And I didn't even have the words for that yet, but I fell in love with that process. And as time went by, it occurred to me that this was something that I really enjoyed. And as I was finishing up that 5-year period of time when I was serving in that capacity, I stumbled into opportunity. Well, opportunity is, I mean, it was an opportunity, but I never really been to personal therapy myself. I didn't know the process. I didn't know really what it was. And I listened to, we were on a family vacation actually at Aspen Grove up in the Provo Canyon area. And I have no idea why we were in a lecture hall, because we never liked to be the people in lecture halls. We were always the one on hikes. So I think there was some sort of like, I don't know, some like divine intervention, but somehow we find ourselves in a lecture hall listening to a therapist talk about marriage or family life or something. I can't even remember, but I just remember something profound happening to me and going, oh, that's what therapists do? Like, I do that. I mean, I don't know how he's doing what he's doing, but I love learning about people and sitting with them and just hearing their stories and helping them feel seen. And so that led me down the path of researching and inquiring. And I found a graduate program here near my home, and I ended up enrolling in a graduate school program. And that just sort of opened my eyes to, well, first of all, there was so much growth that I needed at that point in my life that I had yet to unfold. And so the process itself was a journey of growth and development personally and psychologically. And it began, of course, those things sort of layer spirituality and psychological growth and development sort of layer on top of one another. And so as I was unfolding my own story and learning more about myself, my faith journey started sort of, I began to be a little bit more awake and aware of complexity and more comfortable with the reality that life is complex and that spirituality is complex. And so it took a slow unfolding for me to get to the point to where I was willing and able to sort of both love my tradition and appreciate the way that it had been and was a force for good in my life, but also able to have sort of a critical awareness of its messiness, and that it's okay for things to be messy, that it's okay that I'm messy, and it's okay that it is messy. And so that eventually led me down the path towards addressing this a little bit more and more in my own life. And then, of course, it was a huge leap to where I decided to do this publicly, kind of knowing that it would lead me out into the wilderness. It would take me to a space not only that was unknown, but that was also sort of forbidden. And yet I think my path just sort of, there was a variety of things that just led me to where I knew this was right for me.
I mean, I think, so with this wilderness that you had with this journey, you focused your practice into helping people, that you identified with and were understanding, and you found a large group there. Did you know how big the group was when you started? Did you have any idea how quickly your podcast grew? Because it grew very, very, very fast. Isn't that true?
It did grow very fast, and I was absolutely shocked, actually. I was already podcasting at that point in time and running what I actually thought was a great podcast, but I didn't have a large audience, right? I mean, I was kind of like, gosh, why don't they appreciate me? This is great stuff. And it was, I was talking to people, first of all, about my own clients were coming on and sharing their healing journeys. And it was a wonderful opportunity for both them and for me to kind of get my feet wet and sort of understand the industry better. And I'm sure if I listened back to those, I would just die of, like the poor quality of course, of the production and things like that. But it was what was teaching me. And so I knew I was kind of playing around in the field. And then I sort of expanded it to sort of big tent spiritual growth and midlife crisis and things like that. And then when I sort of pivoted, I was actually running my real podcast. And this was sort of like a side gig that I had no expectation. I didn't know where it would go, but it never occurred to me. It never ever occurred to me that within the first 10 or 12 episodes, all of a sudden I was looking at my analytics and I was like, oh, and then I also was getting letters almost immediately. And we're talking 3 and 4 page letters of people saying things like, I have been suffering for years and nobody has been able to help me understand what I'm feeling and give words. And also you're doing this in a way that is kind and courageous and respectful, but very, very candid. And it was very shocking to me, like, what is happening here?
Mm-hmm.
And what do I do now? Because I needed to decide how professionally to, like, okay, I'm sort of flailing over here with something that's, it's okay, not great. And then I have this other thing that's sort of emerged, and I could feel the pain
Mm-hmm.
of the people that were responding to the new podcast. And that was where I think my heart was like, who is the audience that has the greatest need,
Mm-hmm.
where I have the ability to meet that need in my own sort of frail way as I, am learning as I go. And it felt very clear to me that, like, hey, you've got to go where the need is, and where the large need is, that it was just a mass. And we're talking international. There were people
Mm-hmm.
all over the world that were, I was hearing from people that I could not have anticipated. Like, how did they even find this thing?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's my answer to that one.
Yeah. So let's talk about this faith journey. So what is a faith journey? And then let's talk about, what it's like, how we can get people to really understand what it's like to be in that wilderness of that faith journey, and I appreciate they call it the faith journey. It was a crisis for a while. It was a deconstruction is another word, but like, so let's just talk about, what is that? How does it start for some people? What does it feel like in the middle? However you go with that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, that is one of the episodes that I produced right there at the very beginning of the podcast, actually sort of laid out sort of a path that people go on developmentally, and it's normal, and it's okay, and it's what human beings do. And like, we all sort of understand that, a child starts by not even knowing really, they're just sort of flailing around, and then they roll, and then they crawl, and then they walk, and then they run. And that we understand stages of development when we can visually sort of see it, but we don't tend to recognize that human beings continue to develop after they're in their sort of like adult body. And therefore, because that is somewhat seemingly unknown, or certainly not well enough known, especially I think in sort of more conservative spiritual realms, what happens is that people will comfortably stay in a certain stage of sort of spiritual understanding. And inevitably, for some people, the terrain ceases to match the map, meaning that, like, where their world and their faith system and their understanding of spirituality made perfect sense for a period of time, for at least some people, things happen, and life invites us into opportunities to recognize that the map that I have been given is not matching my life. And that is actually our invitation to the next part of our growing journey. And so when people recognize that what's actually happening right now is not a disaster, it doesn't mean I am evil or lazy or falling apart or falling away, or that, something's going terribly wrong, but rather that I am normal, and this is actually a wonderful thing. At very least, it sort of stabilizes them internally enough to where they can get their bearings so that they can manage their environment. Because for many early stage faith systems, not only do they not have this paradigm, but they acknowledge that something certainly does happen to some people. And they have created a narrative to make this really, really scary, and to turn this into something that is, not only is it like disruptive to the family, but they've sort of turned it into something that has been sort of spiritualized, as if it's something that is disruptive to actual God. And so people step into this very normal, natural process of spiritual development, going through documented, empirically studied stages of faith. They don't know about it. They've been told that whatever this is bad. And then they've got all this incoming information from church systems and families saying, you're doing something terrible, come back. And so that's, I think, one of the reasons why the Latter-day Struggles podcast has been very, very helpful to people, not only on a faith journey, because they're recognizing, okay, yes, this first feels like a crisis. And then when I understand the nature of what I'm experiencing, I can see that this is actually a faith expansion experience, that I'm on a journey that is developmentally normal. And then, of course, I think I don't know too many people, and I've worked with hundreds of people in the last 3 years that works through this and has like complete and total peace around their relationships. I don't see that. Sadly, for the most part, many people become really, really confident in themselves. They find themselves, and they recognize the spiritual depth and breadth that they are taking in, especially when they work with me, because I think falling into a faith crisis doesn't guarantee a productive faith journey. But I think when one starts to understand what's going on, and then they really embrace this and recognize that this is developmentally progressive, potentially, if I dig deep and do the work. And that often happens. And also it gives people enough courage and strength as they psychologically grow to then tolerate the distress and the grief that comes with changing relationships with those who just are really struggling with understanding what they're going on, and really don't even like they struggle even believing that this, that people can say, listen, this is good. I'm thriving. I've never felt closer to God. And, people from different realities, different stages, they really authentically love their loved ones on a faith journey, but they can't see it. It doesn't look that way. And that's not what they've ever learned or heard about from authority figures that they trust. And so it continues, I think, to be painful interpersonally in the faith journey.
Yeah, I'm going to make sure I link in the description two graphics. One is the stages of faith. There are. I mean, this is a psychology. This is not just someone's opinion. And like you say, it's been studied. It's been it's a theory that's used in psychology. And then also I'm going to include the Erik Erikson's stages of social development, because both of those things, if you can understand, if you look at them together and see how we are developing over time, we are as humans meant to be that way. And to see those two, I think it'd be interesting to see those two together and be like, okay, here's the spiritual side of me. Here's the emotional side of me, that is moving throughout our lives into different stages. And the Erik Erikson's is very clear, he seems to be very clear about what age you are, where the faith, stages of faith is not, but I think if we can get more people to understand that the less pain happens when this happens, because I don't know, I was going to ask you, do you think there is a way to prevent having a faith journey? I mean, is there a prevention that can happen? I don't know if it's the case. I mean, everybody that I know, it's not something they would necessarily have chosen, at least at different points throughout the journey.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the faith journey chooses us more than we choose it.
Yes.
And having said that too, I know from, again, working with and speaking to so many people, we tend to talk about this, the metaphor of the shelf quite frequently, at least in these spaces. And I mean, people will hold on to and hang on to their shelves, as it were, for quite a while, which is in essence, basically sort of opting out of the faith journey, at least for a period of time. And even when I sort of acknowledge that, or when I work with my own people in a lot of my growth and development groups, a lot of the work that we do, especially in sort of the deeper into my process, after someone has really found a firm sense of self and they have discovered their own core identities as good, and that this process is good, we kind of shift over to like, okay, how to manage with compassion our relationships. And one of the activities that we do is to kind of understand or try to gain empathy around why is it that I am where I am developmentally, and why is it that my loved one, maybe this is a parent, maybe this is a partner or an adult child or a best friend, why are they where they are? And to sort of recognize with a ton of compassion that this is not a morality thing. Nobody is becoming better or superior to anybody else on a faith journey. What we are doing is we are responding to our own sort of internal developmental cues that for each human being, we are on a trajectory based on what we have experienced and what our soul is sort of ready to take on. And for some people, based on, what they've been through, they're not in a position to, and maybe never will be in a position to go on a faith journey or to even ask some of these hard questions, because their prominent need for comfort, safety, and belonging always ends up sort of transcending their soul's sort of desire to sort of push through that and decide to challenge some of the, like the majority narratives of, say, our families or our systems or something like that. And so some people don't go on a faith journey. And so I guess in some ways my answer to that question is, can one choose not to? I guess someone can, because it's scary. It's choosing to like step into this space of unknowing and looking at the shelf or letting the shelf break. It does require a great deal of management of anxiety and fear. And I think for some people, it starts to feel a little bit inevitable, especially when, say, for example, when something emerges in one's life and they feel as if they're made to choose. My family, a big one that's very common in this faith tradition, in the LDS faith tradition, is I have a child come out as on the queer spectrum, LGBTQ plus in some ways. And so it's like, how do I confront what used to be my very comfortable black and white way of looking at something that really hasn't touched me closely, so it doesn't challenge me? And now I'm looking at this beautiful soul who I adore, who I've given, so much of myself to as a parent or a caregiver. And what is being taught sort of in an objective way, it doesn't map with the reality of this child's soul and what the theology says about them. And so this is the point where I think some people say, listen, I had to confront this because I couldn't allow for my soul could not resonate with the potential that this child was made wrong.
Right.
And so that is, I think, what brings people to a tipping point where they say, whatever the pain and suffering is going to be, and however this is going to destabilize the rest of my life, I choose into the courage that requires that I'm required to have on this faith journey, because the alternative puts me into so much distress because of someone whom I love that I can't do it. I think it just depends on where is the pain? Is the pain more in sort of holding on to the shelf, or is the pain more in letting it go and recognizing that this is going to be scary and hard, but I'm here for it because the alternative is worse.
Yeah. And when I think about that journey, I almost feel like it really is this place from an outside validation, an outside, getting understanding from outside to moving to that inside. Like you talk about that self, that really is where, that's what's so scary, I think, at the beginning, for people other than yourself and even within yourself. It's like, this all of a sudden this is coming from the inside and it doesn't match other people. But yet, doesn't that seem like the beautiful journey is for people to be themselves fully, to connect to their own, that higher version of themselves, that if we really understand science, time and space doesn't exist. So that exalted being is alive and well now, and could be our best person to contact, within our, that part of ourselves. And it's not to say selfish or self-focused, but to really get really comfortable or with those things that are uncomfortable, because we're understanding ourselves and why that's just uncomfortable and what shows up for us. And all of that is just pure us on the deepest, most vulnerable level. And I think it's not innate in us. It's got to come from a journey to get there.
Yes, I love what you're saying. And I will say that the work that I do with the people that I am privileged to work like deeply with through my growth and processing groups, we are walking on sacred ground when we we begin the process. Actually, the whole entire journey of healing actually begins with this discovery of this beautiful, fully formed, always good, infinitely lovable self that is right there. It's right there. It's been there all along. And yet it needs to be discovered. It needs to be noticed. And I also try to help people have grace, not only on themselves,
Right.
for like not knowing this, like, this treasure hidden in plain sight, but also having grace on others who are still sort of leaning on outside authority to sort of tell them who am I? What do I believe? What do I stand for? Because developmentally, that's completely appropriate. As little human beings, cognitively, psychosocially sort of developing, we don't have access to the depths of our souls. And therefore, it's perfectly appropriate to sort of lean on outside authority. That's why children, have parents.
Right.
And to have the big people sort of tell them who they are and what's best for them. And so developmentally speaking, one needs that for a period of their life. The problem, I think, comes in when sometimes I think we are led to believe that is the end game, that it's always we were supposed to be this way, and that it's always an outsourcing of power because maybe we are not quite trustworthy ourselves, or heaven forbid we make a mistake, which I think comes from sort of a theologically unsound understanding of God sometimes. Like, it's like, wow, if that kind of God is so like worried about our making mistakes, then we better not trust ourselves, because the reality is when we trust ourselves as we're learning who we are as a self, we are going to make mistakes and then we're going to grow. And God over there, from where I sit, is cheering the entire process on and loves us infinitely, not in spite of our woundedness and our messiness, but because we're being brave enough to own the journey, and we're having the courage to stumble and fall and know that we're good throughout the entire process. And so when people start recognizing that, like, I, from my core of my being, am good, and I can trust myself, and I can learn how to tap into my body and truly own my own spirituality. I can learn how to trust what resonates with me and what connects me to my sources, to my higher powers, to God. And then like you sort of said a minute ago, Michelle, we then sort of start being able to recognize that not only am I able to worship creators or those who are part, like, how do I say this? I am not only capable of connecting with the divine, but I see myself and I can acknowledge divine actually within me, which is incredibly theologically sound and something that most of us learned in primary, that I am actually divine. God is within me. And because God is within me, I can learn how to trust the ability that each of us has within us to connect the God from within to the God beyond, and we can really truly become one. And this is where I think people start going, okay, I can hold on to that which has been such a force for good in my early stage faith. And also I can learn how to have the confidence to truly know that I have always been and always will be enough, and that my own spiritual journey is in fact my own. And that in and of itself is very scary and shocking for some people. And also, I think it requires a great deal of continuous courage building, because we will have loved ones and those in our environment who are terrified of this thing that's happening to us and what we're doing. One of the things I've been reading about just very recently is I'm way deep into Ken Wilber right now and his integral theory. And one of the things he talks about that's very profound is that each individual marriage, family system, church system, cultural system has what he calls a center of gravity. And the system will do everything it possibly can to bring everyone up to the center of gravity. It really wants everyone to enjoy this center of gravity. And then it will also do everything possible to drag everybody down who tries to supersede the center of gravity. So it'll grab you by the heels and bring you back because it's uncomfortable to move beyond where your culture says this is where we all understand one another. And boy, didn't that hit me hard as I've been reading that, because I was like, yes, that's a phenomenon that I see on the regular. And then I think then we throw sort of like God on top of it and like, you must come down. And not only am I uncomfortable, but now it's because God says so. So it taps not only into our fears around being left alone or being abandoned by our loved ones, but also you kind of pile on top of that God says so. And so it takes a great deal of ego structure and a great deal of sort of trusting in the growing of our true selves to say, I understand why this is scary to you, but that is not the God I worship. And I am on a journey and I can still love you where you are, but I also need to hold on to myself.
Love it. Wow. It reminds me of that Maya Angelou quote in the book that says, you're only free when you realize you belong no place. You belong every place and no place at all. The price is high and the reward is great. Like if I had to ask you that question, that answer you just gave would be the perfect explanation of that quote. It's beautiful. And it is, I think the price is high sometimes, but the reward is so much better. So thank you for that answer.
Let's talk about, you have been in the middle, a little bit of a new wilderness recently. And so, well, first I want to say, I think that this kind of journey is happening on all parts of, all over the world for all different religions, all different, maybe even different groups. This idea of things kind of shifting and changing and being on different levels of development. And so, first of all, have you heard from people outside of your own faith? Yeah, it's universal.
Yeah, I actually have. I've been shocked by how much what my husband and I have been experiencing has been resonating with people that I would not expect. Of course, I knew that like my near and dear, the people that I have been the most deeply connected to would be just in extreme grief, because we haven't really shared our process, mostly because I didn't want it to be a distraction from the healing work that that matters so much to us. And so it was such a shock to so many of our loved ones. Well, the people that I worked the most closely with. And then I was shocked by and extremely touched by the number of people that are more traditionally believing people in the church who don't follow our work, but just heard about it and were just in extreme grief too and reached out. And that was so healing for me to hear from people like on that side of the spectrum. And then there was the side of the spectrum of the people who have I guess they're called like post-Mormons or ex-Mormons. They too were like, you're amazing. We're so proud of you. We love you. Thank you for, and I mean, and I've been, I'm in the inside of the edge. And so I didn't really expect that. And then I remember one specific letter from a gentleman who had been shunned from his Quaker community, which I was like, I didn't know that happened from Quakers on the East Coast. And somehow he had, I know how religious news services, of course, ran this, and it was syndicated. And so it sort of got picked up by some different places across the country. And he wrote a beautiful letter, just stand strong, and how he had found a new congregation in his own community that, across the country, but someone who would accept and be more open. And he actually, the sword he died on was, sort of the same thing that all of us are working through, which is gender and sexuality here in our culture. And he was like, I couldn't preach and stand by that when I know people are suffering, and like, I won't stand and represent a God that I don't believe treats, their children that way. And so that was extremely touching, because I think what you're touching into, and I'm agreeing with, is that what we're going through is a beautiful upward spiral of spiritual development that is not tribal in nature, unless you consider all of God's children the same tribe.
Right.
That we are all kind of collectively growing. And maybe this, I mean, I dare say this is probably happening all of the time, but I think because we're a little bit more of a global community that has the ability to sort of know what one another are doing more so now in this era than ever before, that we're checking in with one another, we're reading things, we're noticing that people are in fact growing spiritually, and there is there's going to always be sort of that center of gravity resistance, but in some ways it's I guess hope giving. And also I do notice that sort of the phenomenological nature of like human beings grow faster than their systems, and always have. Having read, I love early Christian history, probably because I resonate with, some of those early martyrs, and it makes me feel like I'm not alone.
Right.
But the fact that even then the church systems, in an effort to keep everyone safe and united and correlated, they are always resistant to the reformers, the ones that are like, hey, wait a second, what about this? What about that? And so in some ways I see lots of progress. In other ways I see sort of the cyclical nature of how humanity is always sort of, there's going to be a resistance between the systems that want to conserve and sort of maintain a status quo to keep people safe and to sort of manage the meet the needs of people in earlier stages of their development. And then those of us who are always sort of nudging the process forward, because there is a population of people that are ready and that want that, and are trying to navigate that in the context of their faith systems, or at least their family systems that are connected to the faith system.
Yeah. So, in reference to like the book, and moving into the wilderness and belonging to yourself, you had to choose, you had to do that in real time. Maybe all of us don't have to do it as blatantly as you did when you were presented with the idea that you were no longer welcome in your faith, and so you chose to step away on your own. And what was that like? All the ups and all the downs and making that decision, and how was that for holding on to yourself and belonging to yourself?
I was so excited well, let me tell you a little backstory as I lead to answering your question. I read this book a while ago, and I was shocked at how much it had impacted me without my realizing it. Meaning that when I read it before, I liked it. I've followed Brené Brown for years, and yet reading this again in the last week, just kind of preparing for this, I had no idea how much this book impacted me, in that some of my curriculum talks, like I had spent an entire session with my groups on Maya Angelou's quote, which I found from this book. And also I was really struck by how this book it definitely hit me different, because, whenever it was a few years ago when I read it, I was like, wow, that sounds hard. This concept of going into the wilderness. And as I listened to it this time and paused and took notes, it was different, because now it was extraordinarily personal. Right. And it was a way for me to sort of, I guess, pause and reflect and more deeply internalize, with the use of her beautiful words, what this process has been as it has unfolded. And as far as the ups and downs go, there were many. I will say that my choice to start this public platform, I did fully aware that this could be the price I pay. Meaning that I sort of remember asking myself in a moment, Valerie, if you do this, this is the potential. You could be excommunicated, because this is, we don't do this in this faith tradition. No one does not speak about the taboo. And of course I didn't want that. But I also knew, even so early on in the process, that I had a deep something within me kind of knew that that someone needed to talk about these things. And it had to be someone who had a special combination of skills. And I kind of recognized that I had those. And that maybe the skill that mattered the most, or maybe the attribute I should say that mattered the most, was courage. And also compassion. And it felt important to me from the very beginning that I enter into this dialogue in a way that was respectful, and that I was very clear that I wasn't here to do harm. That what I wanted to do was help people and help the institution if they were interested in my feedback. And I did this very intentionally, knowing that this was possible. And so for the first, year and a half or so, no feedback from any formal authorities. And I thought that was great. But I will say, I didn't like the feeling that I had, which was that I was always sort of looking over my shoulder. To me, that actually in and of itself is evidence of a sick system or a sick marriage, or, when you feel like I'm not doing anything wrong, but I might be punished nonetheless. And so it almost in some ways, I mean, I'm willing to say this now, wasn't back then, but it was probably inevitable. Maybe not inevitable. I guess that's not true, because I think it's also very dependent on where one lives and a combination of factors that are out of one's control. But I guess that's just all to say it felt to me, I very quickly, especially when I started getting the feedback from so many people, I knew I was doing the right thing. I knew it. I 100% knew it. And so therefore, slowly the fear of like, what's the worst thing, it just diminished, because I really recognized that, first of all, I really unattached myself to the institutional system as something. I didn't need to answer to them. I knew that I wasn't on an errand for them. I was on an errand for God. And I also really learned to have compassion. All the time I spent sort of talking to these gentlemen, I wanted to see it through, because I wanted to give every last one of them a chance to hear and perhaps learn and have their hearts open, if not now, then maybe down the road. But I wanted to give them opportunities to see how I brought with me love and compassion and a desire to do nothing other than serve God. And I kind of thought to myself, if I bring that energy with me and they still choose to sort of, out us, then I really, this has nothing to do with me and Nathan. This is not about us. This is about their own fear and woundedness. And therefore I will proceed and continue to do what I feel called to do. And so it was very scary for the first meeting or two. And then I think I sort of grieved and settled into the, like, this could happen, because this is a situation over which I have no control. I can't control how they interpret this and whatever they choose to do. And then it started to feel a little bit like a collusion toward the end, almost like I am giving them power to hurt me. And I only associate that with this, and I don't know if you want to talk about this, we can cut this out if you want, but like the piece that felt the most like actively harmful to me and my family was when they wouldn't let my husband and me support our son in the temple. To me, that felt like I was participating, I was colluding, and they're like letting me abuse them. And yet we were in such a tricky situation, because we wanted to support our child, and we'd raised our child in the system, hearing his parents talk about going on missions. And so that was quite painful, because it started to get very personal when it felt like I am trying to help and having a great deal of success with people that are really struggling, many of whom choose to stay affiliated and stay active, others who don't, but are softening their stance and continuing to stay happily married and respecting their loved ones and on this big, beautiful journey. Like, people are doing well no matter where they end up on the the affiliation or attendance spectrum. And I feel like my family is suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And you're a family church.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. That is a journey.
Hey, Fidelity. What's it cost to invest with the Fidelity app?
Start with as little as $1 with no account fees or trade commissions on U.S. stocks and ETFs.
That's music to my ears.
I can only talk.
Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Zero account fees apply to retail brokerage accounts only. Sell order assessment fee not included. A limited number of ETFs are subject to a transaction-based service fee of $100. See full list at fidelity.com/commissions. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC, member NYSE SIPC.
Vitamin Water Zero Sugar has great taste, zero BS, and obviously zero sugar. For those with zero room in their calendar. Zero patience for slow walkers. Those who get 0 hours of sleep on a Saturday night. Have zero filter, zero given, and zero interest in grabbing a plain, boring water. Grab a delicious Vitamin Water Zero Sugar today.
The new McCrispy Strip is here. Dip approved by ketchup, tangy barbecue, honey mustard, Sprite, McFlurry, Big Mac sauce, double dipped in buffalo and ranch, more ranch, and creamy chili McCrispy Strip Dip. Now at McDonald's. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
So I wanted to kind of, while I have you here, to talk to you a little bit about, because in more than just this system, in other systems, there are a few things that really show up in this area, but also in other areas. One is patriarchy, and the other is, I want to talk a little bit about enmeshed families and how that kind of, I want you to describe those two things and how they play a part in a lot of our spiritual lives at this point, and how it affects it, and how we can, and what we need to do about that.
Okay, so let's start with patriarchy. So patriarchy is something that I have spent quite a bit of time on, mostly because my population of people in and around the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has, whether they kind of like know it or not, we've been impacted by patriarchy, and as well as the fact that we live in a country that has been very patriarchal in nature, and we live in a world that has been very patriarchal in nature for actually several thousand years. And so it is sort of it's the water in which we swim. And patriarchy, to define it in a very simple way, is it's a system that sort of inherently believes and is trying to think if I ever to define this succinctly. Let me think about this. That the patriarchy is a system that inherently favors men as having unique power and privilege and responsibility over women. And it's so baked in to our culture that it's often invisible in how many ways this plays out. And therefore, it impacts every human being, at least it impacts every human being, both developmentally, but also spiritually, because anytime a child of God is socialized to believe that they are either superior to or inferior to another of God's children, it goes against their own divine nature, because my belief is that we are all created equal, that God's children are all equally beloved and divine. And so one of the things that I feel is just really important, that I have focused quite a bit on the Latter-day Struggles platform, because I am a mental health worker, and I care about not only the relationships of the human beings, but to the degree that human beings themselves are psychologically healthy, they enter into relationships and can be relationally healthy. So it sort of begins with the self. And to the degree that we don't understand the harm that patriarchy does, both to women and men, it just sort of runs the show. And we don't even realize the many ways in which it is impacting us and our worldview and the way we sort of see ourselves and the way we sort of unconsciously behave and interact with the world. And therefore, to me, it's been really important to just sort of lots of education, lots of understanding about the nature of patriarchy is such that it impacts marriages. It impacts, there's a high correlation between patriarchy and pretty much every form of abuse between a few men in power and everyone else. And that's another thing I think it's important to clarify, that patriarchy is not sort of a wholesale belief in all men over all women. Really, it's a system of power where a few men have power over all of the other underling men and all women and children. And so men who are not in power spend a lot of their time trying to gain that power just because it doesn't feel good to have it, to not have power, right?
Right.
And women oftentimes know they can't have power because they believe that they are essentially not eligible, but they oftentimes do spend time trying to figure out how they can position themselves so that they're protected by those who do have power. And it's an enormous subject that I have produced many episodes on the Latter-day Struggles podcast around, not because I mean, interestingly, sometimes people are like, well, you just want women to have the priesthood. And I kind of chuckle at that because I'm like, I've literally never said that. And actually, I don't even think that would solve the problem.
Right.
This is such a deeper core issue about how we ourselves see ourselves and how we are sort of co-created by our cultural traditions, our history, our spiritual traditions, and how this is, in essence, a really big reason why humanity suffers greatly. And so that's why I am really quite passionate about it, because it's really at the intersection of gender and sexuality and power and politics and abuse and exploitation. It really sort of, it all sort of flows towards, we as a patriarchal world are, many of these things are, the struggles are an outcome of this sort of dominator model, as opposed to in a healthy marriage, church, world system, we are bonded by connection as opposed to needing to have power over and power under. And I mean, just as a little side note to that, as a piece of the deeper work I've done to sort of help people understand patriarchy, I've really gone deeper into masculine and feminine. And that really, I get, is a very important topic for people on a faith journey, because due to patriarchy, we have been conditioned and socialized to worship a male god. And that is a social construction. And the social construction is that because God is male, males therefore, deserve to be seen as superior to. But as we sort of unpack that and recognize that that is a social construction, and there's a lot of history, a lot of anthropology that can really speak into the fact that there is absolutely a feminine divine energy that has been worshipped, by many cultures for many centuries. And to the extent that we understand how much our world has been sort of absorbed in this false belief about a male god and about sort of the essential nature of the superiority of men, we can kind of dial that back and go, okay, wait a minute. What if we look at this from the perspective of divine creators that in some way embody, or embody is not even the right word, they hold energy that is both masculine and feminine. And to the degree that we all can recognize that we are created by a force that doesn't privilege one over the other, but that actually a wholeness of God and love and goodness is masculine and feminine. And each of us down here can learn how to recognize, to what degree have I been socialized to sort of estrange myself from parts of my own identity that I have been taught to believe don't belong to me. And that in and of itself, I know this is a giant question. I'm trying to sort of put in a little bit of a nutshell.
You're
but
doing
yeah,
great.
I am passionate about that. And I think it matters. It's a big part of our spiritual and psychological development.
Yeah, nobody was more surprised than myself when I had a very distinct interaction with Divine Feminine, and she was not passive. She was not, she was, I mean, it was, and that the first thing, like you said, the first thing that went through my mind is, I can be like that. You know what I mean? I had decided I wasn't supposed to be loud and bold and decisive and know who I am and declare my wants and needs. Like, wow, it was super powerful. And I know you've had experiences like that too with that divine. So what about enmeshed families quickly? Like, I feel like sometimes we get in groups and we become an enmeshed family. So maybe describe that, and then how that, and how we can recognize when we're in these kind of family dynamics.
Yeah. So an enmeshed family system is just one where the boundaries are too porous between individuals. And what that means, said in a slightly different way, is that healthy families support the growth and development of each member of the family. And the word I like to use to describe this is this concept of differentiation, which means each and every one of us, again, when we're little and young, we're not differentiated. We don't really know who we are as a self. But as we psychologically and spiritually grow up, one of the beautiful tasks of development is to recognize that I am a self. I have my own thoughts and feelings and desires and beliefs and passions, and I am able to own those things. And to the degree that I am able to know who I am, I can actually become an independent, confident self. And also I can honor and respect that you get to be the very same independent, confident self, knowing what you think and believe. And you can have your own desires and passions. And so the healthy family, paradoxically, is able to hold space for the otherness of the other. And that actually, in and of itself, creates a bond of connection and love. And that's the interesting thing, is that an enmeshed family mistakes sort of this sense of like, we all have to think and believe and feel the same for us to be healthy and for us to be okay. And to the degree that you are different, you are a threat to our family. And this is a scary, treacherous place to be in when one is trying to be a healthy self in an enmeshed family, because they are getting all of these signals that they are the problem, when actually what they are trying to do is developmentally on track. It's what the soul is made to do. And so what I encourage people, and I believe that this is a struggle in the community that I work in, because we overprivilege conformity and we underprivilege growth and development, I think. And so sometimes I think what happens is when somebody is on a faith journey, what they're actually doing is learning how to, they're finding themselves, they're differentiating. And I'm not talking about somebody who's like throwing all their values out the window. Generally speaking, the differentiation journey is a profoundly value-based unfolding of one's divinity. And yet some family systems see this as extremely threatening, almost as if our identity is defined by our uniformity, instead of recognizing that you belong in this family because you are beloved, because you are special, because you are unique. And I can honor your journey because I'm not threatened by it. And I think that's what kind of happens in some of these more enmeshed families, is that because in some cases, people have not gone on this journey themselves, they're unfamiliar with what's going on over there. and they feel as if it's a threat to the group. But I also think, once again, it always becomes way more heated when you take a concept that's psychological in nature and turn it into a spiritual topic that then is like, it's forbidden, right? Like, in other words, like if we say, okay, this family system believes conceptually that everyone has to think and feel and believe the very same way for them to be okay, then they are going to be threatened when somebody moves beyond that, especially when you say, for example, have theology that reinforces enmeshment.
Right.
And that is where it gets really messy. And sometimes people feel like I have to make a choice. And that's a worst case scenario. But sometimes I think they feel, if I don't conform to this enmeshed family, I am no longer sort of accepted or acceptable. And I have to sort of try to forge a path of some kind of connection in a way that, is healthy, while also recognizing that, like, I don't want to give up my growth journey. I don't want to have to choose between being connected to you and owning myself. And those are sort of on the farther side of like unhealthy, toxic systems, is the family that says you either look like this or you don't belong. And on the healthy side of the spectrum, families say, we embrace your growth and your journey, and we want to support you and understand you at very least. And sometimes, I mean, that's the thing, is that people that are even in earlier stages of faith, I have noticed and been just really touched by some families that can say, I don't understand this. I don't know that I am comfortable with it. I don't think my theology agrees with it, but I love you. And I'm just going to surrender and trust in God that it's going to be okay, because what you're doing is so important to you that I'm not willing to sort of, in a very black and white binary way, demand that you be something that clearly you can't be unless you fake it. And so it is possible, but I do think it takes a great deal of wrestling and sort of understanding, like, what is going on here, and reconfiguring what does a healthy family look like, and what theology is helpful to the cultivation of a healthy family, and what theology maybe isn't so helpful, even though it's trying to sort of promote healthy family on the ground. Sometimes I think we have to look at the reality and go, maybe this isn't promoting healthy family systems if it's discouraging people from being authentic.
Right.
To say thank you so much for showing up authentically. And, I think of you in a way like Brené Brown, in a way that you showed up 100% the way you were, and people needed it and wanted it. So thank you for being you. And thank you for showing up that way. You have an amazing message. Because we're the Wholeness Network, and you mentioned wholeness earlier, I heard, but what does wholeness mean to you?
To me, I think about wholeness as one's ability to integrate their full selves. Meaning, for me, it's my ability to love my gifts and acknowledge them and own them. And I think sometimes as women, we struggle with allowing ourselves to say, hey, I'm good at that. I have something special here. And I think that's part of wholeness. I also think wholeness is acknowledging our shadows and not having any shame connected to where we struggle and where we see ourselves as underdeveloped, or where we know we need to work on something, to just acknowledge it, like, that's okay. We're all on a journey and we're all learning and growing, and that's exactly as it should be. And I think wholeness also is striving to embody love and compassion for ourselves and for others, and also acknowledging when it's hard, and not being too critical with ourselves when it feels like, oh, that part of embodying love, this moment, this situation, this relationship, this is hard. And yet also recognizing that when we know who we are at our core, when we know that we are whole, at our core, that we can continue to draw upon that always has been and always will be, and doesn't need to be repaired or fixed, that we can draw upon who we are. And the more we, I guess, take the time to become more and more intimate with and familiar with who we are in our core, we bring that wholeness into our lives, into our relationships, into our work. And it's an unfolding process. It's never realized. I think we have moments where we feel it deeply. I think we have moments where at least I can feel that I'm on a growth's edge and like, oh, this one's hard. I don't know if I can do this today. But even just honoring and having a lot of compassion in this process of unfolding, that to me, it's not an arrival. It's not a destination. It's a way to be present in the process. It is, to me, what wholeness is.
When most people are asked what they want, they will answer, I want to be happy. But happy takes practice. And that's what the Wholeness Library is all about. So check it out free at thewholenessnetwork.com.